If you enjoy what you hear here today, please consider supporting me on my Patreon page. Every dollar helps, and you get to see content that you won't see here. Chapter 16. Visions. It had been rather disturbing to Twilight when she had been summoned by Princess Celestia and Rainbow Dash at the same time. She'd been preparing to turn in for the night after a fairly successful round of candy gathering when a member of the guard approached and delivered her the news. Now, Twilight found herself in a brisk canter for the designated meeting point. What was most rattling to Twilight was that, normally, Rainbow didn't ever invoke her ability to summon ponies. This was the first time it had happened, and that on its own was unsettling to the young unicorn, and she made her way to one of the dining rooms of the castle. According to the summons, Rainbow was hungry and hadn't gotten much candy from her time outside before calling for this meeting. So Celestia had arranged for their meeting to be held in a dining room with a kitchen just a room over so Rainbow could eat while they discussed the matter.
But what matter is it? What's going on?
Twilight pondered mentally before turning another corner. Finally, the door to the dining room came into view. 2 members of the royal guard standing in front of it, stoic as ever. One of them looked down and nodded firmly. "Ah, there you are. We've been expecting you. Please head inside. The princesses are waiting." The other guard nodded and pulled the door open with a quick burst of magic, ushering her in and then closing the door behind her. Twilight took in the room for a moment before her eyes settled on the 2 other ponies in the room. She couldn't help but cringe somewhat at the mess Rainbow was making at her plate, noisily and hungrily demolishing a mound of chocolate chip cookies. She swiftly stuffed another hoofful of tasty baked goods down her throat before she peered up at Twilight and waved in greeting. Princess Celestia sat across the modest round table from Rainbow and smiled in satisfaction at her daughter's enthusiastic eating. The little Pegasus seemed much more relaxed than when she had first shown up with word of her problem. The Solar Princess then turned her gaze to Twilight and smiled wider.
"Ah, Twilight, there you are. It's good to see you could make it in such a short amount of time. Please, have a seat."
Twilight bowed deeply to Celestia.
"Of course, Princess. I would never ignore summons from you or Rainbow Dash."
She then stood up and approached the table.
"Though I must admit, I am confused. What's so pressing that Rainbow invokes her right of summoning on me? She's never done that before."
Rainbow swallowed her mouthful of cookies and stared at Twilight with a level expression.
"I had a hallucination too,"
she said bluntly. Twilight felt her jaw drop in surprise when she heard this. She turned and looked at Rainbow with wide eyes.
"What? Seriously? You did?"
she asked in shock.
"Yep, and it was an awful lot like yours,"
Rainbow replied with a frown and nod.
"I couldn't see anything other than the hallucination itself. I couldn't see Minuet asking me or shaking me or anything. It was...
She shivered slightly at the memory of the feeling.
"Minuet was with you?"
Twilight pressed, her surprise becoming even more apparent. Rainbow nodded, but it was Princess Celestia who spoke next.
"Yes, Twilight. In her vision, Rainbow saw herself and another decidedly pink pony about to pull some sort of prank on Fluttershy. Apparently, the pink pony was not okay with this and talked Rainbow out of it,"
she explained with a more serious look coming onto her muzzle.
"Every pony present in the vision was an adult, Rainbow Dash and Fluttershy included."
Twilight bit her lip before hopping up onto an empty seat at the table.
"Once is an accident, twice is a coincidence,"
she muttered before looking up to Celestia questioningly.
"Has anybody else had visions like these? Any pony at all?"
Celestia shook her head.
"None that I know of, but the fact that it has happened twice, and to 2 ponies I hold dear no less, is cause for concern."
She looked to Rainbow Dash, a small amount of worry shining in her eyes.
"But nothing is wrong with either of you, physically or mentally, near as I can tell." "So what gives? Why are we having these freaky vision things?"
Rainbow asked with an irked grimace, taking another cookie and biting it quite loudly. Celestia closed her eyes in deep thought.
"There are a few possibilities. But the one that seems the most likely to me right now is that something, or some pony, is projecting these visions into your mind from an outside location.
She opened her eyes and looked between the two fillies carefully.
It would explain why there aren't any problems with your mental health or physical bodies. The visions aren't originating from you. Something might be sending you these visions from somewhere else, and, as such, we would only be able to track the visions to their source while it was happening.
Twilight sighed as the largest puzzle to solve with that theory immediately sprang into her mind.
And there hasn't been any sort of pattern on when these things happen, has there? Exactly right, Twilight, there hasn't,
Celestia affirmed with a nod.
We shall just have to wait and keep our eyes peeled. The visions themselves don't appear to be common, and, from what little we know, they depict scenes that are similar in some capacity to the situations you two have been in when you had them. Meaning external stimuli triggers these visions,
Twilight added with her muzzle scrunching up in thought.
And we don't know what circumstances will trigger another vision,
Celestia reminded before looking to Rainbow Dash.
So we have no way of predicting it.
Ugh, so that basically means we have to wait?
Rainbow slumped in her seat with a groan.
Oh, but I hate waiting!
Luckily for you, I am very good at waiting,
Celestia said with a small smile and a distant look coming to her eyes.
For now, you two don't have anything to worry about. The visions you have had don't seem to have done any harm, so I think we can safely take our time with this matter. Nevertheless, it would be for the best if these incidents are reported to me as soon as they occur. The more information we have, the better.
Twilight nodded in agreement.
Of course, Your Highness. I'll tell you right away if I have another one.
Rainbow grumbled with agitation, but otherwise nodded along.
Alright, fine. But if we find a way to figure out what's going on quickly without having to wait, I say we jump on it.
As long as it isn't risky, then I agree.
Celestia nodded before relaxing her expression into something less serious.
But, with all of that said, I feel that as long as we are together here, we should make the most of the opportunity.
With a single, small flick of her magic, Celestia rang a bell that hung over a side door in the room. The door swung open, and a mare in a chef's uniform strolled into the dining room with a warm and practiced smile. Floating behind her were 3 platters, each one covered with a lid. Twilight looked on in surprise as the platters were set down in front of each of them. Rainbow Dash raised an eyebrow.
Celestia, I just ate.
Celestia smirked with a knowing twinkle in her eyes.
I know you did, and I also know that a plate of cookies is no substitute for a good dinner. Especially if said dinner is your favorite meal.
She then looked between Twilight and Rainbow while the chef excused herself. Celestia's smile took on a somewhat sad tilt.
And if we are being honest, I all too rarely get to enjoy a meal with company. Oftentimes I have to dine on my own.
If you don't like eating dinner alone, then why don't you ever ask me to join you? You know I'd be happy to.
Rainbow questioned with a tilt of her head. Celestia grinned and giggled lightly behind her hoof.
Because, Rainbow, you're always asleep when I normally have my dinner.
Her smile widened at the small look of realization on Rainbow's face.
And I have come to deeply understand the hazards of waking you up when you aren't ready. You are quite a little she-demon if your rest is disturbed.
Oh,
was Rainbow's only response, a very small hint of pink coming to her cheeks. Celestia laughed outright at that. Twilight looked between the two of them and smiled softly. The two had definitely bonded since Rainbow first came to Canterlot. Then Celestia used her magic and pulled the lids off of their platters, revealing the meals beneath. Twilight found 2 hay burgers on her platter with a side of hay fries, and instantly her mouth watered. She had no idea how Celestia knew that hay burgers were her favorite food, but hey, she wasn't about to question it or complain. Rainbow, not far away, let out a high-pitched and ecstatic squeal as she beheld a pasta and potato sandwich on sourdough bread. Celestia simply smiled warmly at the two and looked down at her own plate. A high-quality salad, an apple, and, to Twilight's surprise, a large slice of strawberry cake.
Wow, Princess, you didn't need to do all this.
Twilight said, although her mind immediately pointed out how much she didn't mean that statement. Celestia smiled softly.
I know, but I wanted to,
she said gently, before looking at Rainbow with a motherly smile.
And I know it's been a long time since you've had your favorite meal, Rainbow. I felt you've waited long enough.
Rainbow looked up at Celestia with a big smile, despite the tear rolling down her cheek.
You really gotta stop plucking my heartstrings, Celestia. It's getting embarrassing.
She wiped a foreleg across her eyes and smiled wider.
But thank you. I appreciate it. It's nice to get a piece of home every once in a while.
Celestia simply hummed in response before lifting a fork to begin on her meal.
Well, I think we've ogled our food long enough. Dig in, every pony.
It was a simple command that not a single pony in that room was against. The three ponies enjoyed their meal, deciding to just forget the oddity of the visions for the time being and just enjoy themselves. They talked about various things over the course of the meal, including Rainbow Dash asking about the Wonderbolts and learning about an upcoming performance in Canterlot within the next 2 weeks. She more or less made a formal decree then and there that she would be in attendance. Celestia made no objections, saying she would be there herself. Twilight briefly brought up her progress on her latest bit of homework, but once Rainbow began to fake snore to emphasize that that topic was not really good for a dinner like this, the topic quickly changed to something less, as Rainbow had put it, boring. Eventually, however, the meal had to come to an end. The three ponies finished their food and stepped out of the dining room. Celestia smiled down at the two widely, a sleepiness coming over her.
It was wonderful to just sit and talk, you two, but, as it is, the hour demands I turn in for the night. Don't be long in getting some rest yourself, Rainbow Dash,
she said before turning and trotting down the hall for her private chambers.
Yeah, I'll be right there.
Rainbow nodded while waving Celestia off. She then turned to Twilight and smiled expectantly.
So, you're done with the new Daring Do book, right?
Yeah, I am.
You want to read it?
Twilight asked with a small, knowing smirk spreading on her face. Rainbow gave an excited nod in response.
Yeah, I do. The first one was really good.
Twilight rolled her eyes but nodded.
Okay, sure. Come by my room tomorrow and I'll let you borrow it. Just don't damage it, you hear me?
Rainbow nodded with a huge grin.
No sweat. Thanks, Twilight.
She then lunged and gave Twilight a very quick hug before darting off to catch up with Celestia. In fact, the hug was so fast that Twilight blinked and missed it.